In this lecture, you'll learn what exceptions are. And exceptions are thrown when something bad happens in our code. In this lecture, we'll see those exceptions getting thrown, and in the next lecture, we'll learn how to handle those exceptions. Let's go take a look at the documentation for the exception class. This is the documentation for the exception class in C#, and as you can see, just like I said, it represents errors that occur during application execution. Okay, let's go break some code and watch exceptions get thrown in a console app. This is a very simple console app that simply prompts for and reads in a short. Remember, a short is a data type that stores whole numbers, but it has a smaller range than int. Let's go ahead and see some exceptions get thrown. When I run the code, the prompt says the appropriate range of numbers I can enter, and if I'm a good user and enter something valid, then nothing bad happens. But if I run the code again and I read this prompt and I type in Bob, you can see we get an unhandled exception. This one is called a format exception because the input string was not in a correct format. In other words, we can't parse Bob into a short. So the exception was thrown here when we tried to parse the string that we read in. We can actually see another exception if we look at this prompt and say, I would like to enter 33,000, which is outside the range that we can hold in a short. And when I try to parse that into a short, we get a different exception. This one's an overflow exception that says that the value was either too large or too small for an int16, which is just another name for a short. So even with this simple program that we have here, we can get a variety of exceptions thrown, and each of those exceptions are thrown when something bad happens as we're trying to run our code. To recap, in this lecture you learned that exceptions get thrown when something bad happens. You learned that exceptions will crash our console apps, and I'll tell you, exceptions generally don't crash our Unity games because the Unity engine actually handles exceptions that our code throws, but our game probably won't behave the way we expect. And that's one of the reasons that I have us set up the Unity editor the way I do, because when exceptions do get thrown, we get to see red text over in the console output window.